Hi, thanks for joining me. This is Struggling to Whistle, birth. So basically I'm going to talk about how I was induced and the actual process of being induced and the birth as well. So I was put on extra observations by my consultant because Cole's movements kept changing. So there'd go long periods of time where I didn't feel him move, or I'd feel him move excessively. So they started monitoring me. Every 2 days I'd have to go in for observations, which then became every day because every time they observed him he didn't move at all. So a 10-minute observation session turned into an hour and a half, with the midwives in charge basically saying, "I'll come back in 5 minutes," which was extremely frustrating and made me really, really anxious because I never knew quite how long I'd be there or what they were going to do, because the more observations they took, the more they kept hinting that they'd have to either do an emergency C-section or that they would induce me earlier than the full term of my pregnancy. As it was, I was lucky enough to go to full term, and it was at one of my consultant appointments that she suddenly decided she was going to induce me. So she disappeared off to get the diary, at which point I turned to my mum and said, she's wearing odd shoes, and they weren't even, slightly similar. They were nothing similar. One was blue velvet and one was gold. One had a heel and one didn't. I mean, I don't know how she made it out of the house without realising she was wearing odd shoes. But anyway, it didn't fill me with any kind of confidence. My anxiety went through the roof. And I suppose it was the not knowing. And as great as the maternity unit staff were, they were fantastic. But I just knew that there would be issues with my mental health and my medications, because there always is. And it's not their fault. They're not trained to deal with mental health. They're not, they don't have enough time to deal with your mental health. So I was really anxious. And when she came back and said, "We're inducing you tomorrow," I was like, really, really freaked out. So they basically advised me to go home and try and relax. If there was any problems, any changes in movement, any pain, absolutely any difference, then to call the maternity unit and they will advise me. But failing that, call in the morning after 8 and they'll tell us when to come in. So yeah, it's important to note that if you do have any change in movements, in that you either feel your baby move more or less, or you get any pain, any sickness, absolutely any new symptoms at all, always seek professional advice. Even if you call the maternity unit every other day and they basically tell you to stop calling, keep calling. There are people out there that didn't report changes in movement and sadly they lost their baby. So please, please seek advice about everything if you need to, because that's what they're there for. That's what they're paid for, to put you at ease and to help you out. So just do it. Anyway, we called in the morning and I was told to come in for 2 o'clock. So there I was with all my bags and panicking and really, really nervous, and my husband was at work, and it was really, really quite stressful, to say the least. Really stressful. When I got there, I was in a ward with just 2 other ladies who had been there for a couple of days. They were being induced as well. Both of them had previously had kids, but we introduced ourselves, and they'd been doing all the things that you're supposed to do to help bring baby out more. So they were bouncing on the gym ball, they were walking up and down the stairs, they were doing the raspberry tea, they were doing everything, and they'd been doing it for ages. And then I come in and they start me off. So when you're induced, they first of all they will settle you into a bed, and then they'll do the obs. You know, where they put the elastic around your bump, put the monitors on, and they'll monitor you for a little while. So they take your obs, and then they insert the pessary, which I'm not going to lie, is not pleasant, but it's not the worst thing in the world. When you're already thinking that you're going to have this big baby out of a small hole, a pessary is really nothing to worry about. So I had this pessary, and then I'm bouncing on this ball, and every so often they come round and they want to do obs again, and you know, nothing happened after the first pessary, absolutely nothing. And then the midwife came and explained that they would do it 3 times, and then they'd do it again the next day, and then you'd have a day off, and then they'd do it again, and if you didn't succeed, then they'd do a C-section. And I was thinking, oh crap, I'm going to be in hospital for days. You know, because I really didn't expect it to work, because these 2 ladies had been struggling. So around 8:45, they inserted the second one, and then they told me that my mum and my husband had to go, and I'm not gonna lie, I sobbed. I really sobbed, because I knew that stuff was gonna start happening, and I was gonna be on my own, and I was going to be surrounded by midwives that were rushed off their feet and didn't understand mental health, and I just knew that I was going to struggle, and there wouldn't be anybody there to help me through it all. I mean, mentally I would be on my own, and that was terrifying. So my mum and my husband left whilst I sobbed. So if you are sat at home feeling like a whale, and you know you're done now and you want your baby out, bouncing on a ball is really easy to do, and it really does help. And then I started to have a show, as in I went to the toilet and there was a show. You know, it was a bit bloody and stuff. So I went and told the midwife in charge of my care, and she told me to put a pad on, and she'd come and see me in a minute. So she gave me this pad, because it has to be their pad, and literally she turned up in the ward about, you know, a minute later, literally a minute, in which case she looked at the pad and she went, well, there's nothing there. I was like, well, it's only been 60 seconds. So that ended up being nothing. But I was starting to get pain. I was starting to feel something. So I told them, and they gave me painkiller, which I promptly vomited back up. It being the story of my life, for the entire pregnancy I was sick, and then it didn't ease any when I was in the hospital actually having cold. I was just sick. So I went and told them that I was in pain. I was bleeding, and I'd been sick, and the snotty midwife just basically said that there was nothing else she could do. So she instead decided that I should have a bath. Now, considering it's a maternity unit, the bath was ridiculously small. So she ran me this tepid puddle of a bath. She came to check on me. So it took me 20 minutes to get out of that bath, because I was in so much pain. You know, at this point, it hurt to walk, it hurt to stand, to sit, to lie down. It just hurt. So it took me 20 minutes to get out of the bath. And then another 15 minutes to actually get dry and put some clothes back on, because I kept vomiting and I was in so much pain. So when I left the bathroom, I again went and told the midwife that, you know, I was in excruciating pain and, you know, really couldn't rest. So she said that she would come and check on me, which she didn't do. So I returned to the ward, and the 2 ladies I was, you know, that were in the ward were asleep. So I tried to sit on the bed, but in the end I ended up pacing backwards and forwards, because I was in just horrendous pain. Around 1:30, the ladies on my ward woke up and saw me pacing and asked if I was okay, and I explained to them what was going on and how I couldn't sit, couldn't rest, and I hadn't rested. And they decided amongst themselves to seek help. So they basically shouted for help, and like 4 midwives came running, and they both asked for pain meds, and said to them that, you know, I kept vomiting, I couldn't sit down or anything, and that I needed to be checked out. So the midwife said that they'd sort it, and they put me on obs for a little while. I was on obs for about half hour or so. And then they decided they were going to examine me, and she examined me, and I was 10 centimetres. So suddenly, they started paying attention, because the midwife that actually examined me, I said, I haven't had any pain meds because I vomited it back straight away. She went, well, I'll try and get you pethidine, but I've got to get the doctor downstairs to authorise it. But once she examined me and found I was 10 centimetres, she called the labour unit, and I went straight down. Meanwhile, I'm still puking whilst the other two ladies are packing up my stuff for me, and one of them called my mum, who obviously notified my husband, and they came down. So I actually made it into the labour suite around 3:45 in the morning, much to the envy of the other two ladies on the ward, because obviously they'd been doing it for a lot longer than I had, and I was now in the labour suite, which was lovely. I mean, prior to being induced, I had actually scheduled to see the labour suite like a week after I was induced. So obviously I didn't get to see it before I was in it, but it was amazing. And I ended up having a midwife that I dealt with during my obs, so I knew, and she knew me, and then labour pretty much started, although they hadn't sent my paperwork from upstairs, so they couldn't give me pethidine straight away, but I was on gas and air, which you should note makes a really funny noise when you breathe in. So you will laugh, but that didn't help my sickness. Gas and air makes you sick. Well, it made me sick. So there I was breathing in, and then I'd have my contraction, and then I'd puke. I'd have a sip of water, and it'd just go on and on. But they basically told me not to push, which is the worst thing to tell a pregnant woman, because you have no choice but to push. The way I had it, it was like every muscle in my body was trying to eject this baby. It was so powerful, but this was so intense. So when they were saying don't push, I had to counter that push. So it was extremely hard work, and I really, really struggled, and they kept shouting at me and stop pushing, and I was getting quite aggressive with the whole, well, it's not a choice, my body is making me do this. So this went on for a long time. Well, it felt like forever, but I suppose it was about an hour maybe. And then she suddenly said, okay, you can push. From the moment that they said I could push, it was about 20 minutes until Cole was born. You see, the thing is, obviously I kept being sick, but I couldn't get Cole's head out. So he kept going in, and then out, and then in, and then out, and then, yeah. So when he came out, his little nose was all squished to one side. But he arrived in the world at 6:58 in the morning. Yeah, it had been a very, very, very long night, but I really can't fault the staff that I dealt with, including the snooty midwife. They do a hard job, and shift work and long hours and stuff is so hard to manage. So I have absolutely nothing to fault with them in the slightest. They were absolutely lovely, and they delivered my son, who came out with 10 tiny fingers and 10 tiny toes, and because I'd been so worried, it really had affected my mental health during my pregnancy, that my medications would affect him, and he would be born with some kind of deformity or lacking in some way, that he'd be like really ill, or and he came out and he was a healthy weight, £6.13, and he was dinky and adorable, but he was absolutely fine, completely healthy. Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, I lost a lot of blood giving birth, and when they finally said that I could go and get cleaned up, when I stood up, I lost a hell of a lot of blood. to the point that the midwife went, no, sit back down again. I've got to get the doctor, just to check that there wasn't, anything wrong, that I hadn't lost too much. I mean, I hadn't, but they did keep me in that bit longer because my blood pressure was through the roof and I had lost quite a bit of blood. I mean, the birth was difficult. The placenta was even harder because you're so worn out from having the baby. You've got your baby and you're ecstatic, and then they're like, push, and you're like, I don't want to. So that was hard work as well. So after having the baby, obviously they give you something to eat and you get cleaned up, and then they take you back up to the maternity ward. Only you move rooms. You move into a room where, the women have had their babies, and your baby's next to you. I have to say, it was the biggest struggle of the whole thing, having Cole next to me and them keeping me in for a couple of nights, which obviously they did because of the blood loss, the blood pressure, and the fact that Cole had obviously had my medication in his system while he was inside, and he obviously had to detox a bit. Not that my meds were harmful to him, but it was quite a worry, and he really didn't cry. For the 2 nights and 3 days that we were in hospital, he did not cry at all. And I'm not kidding, not at all. But I was really concerned because obviously I take medication to help me sleep, and at the time it was different medication and it really knocked me out. And so the night feeds, I just couldn't stay awake to feed him. And the staff on duty did not understand, and they did not offer any help whatsoever. So I ended up crying quite a lot of the time during the night because I just couldn't stay awake to feed him. But he needed me to, because Cole was a poor feeder. He had a tongue tie and a lip tie, which I didn't know about at the time, but so he didn't feed. So it was taking over an hour to get him to have an ounce of milk. I couldn't breastfeed because my consultant had told me that I couldn't. So it was formula, but he really wouldn't have it. And it was such a long process that in the night time when I'd taken my medication, I really couldn't stay awake for that hour to feed him. So I felt like I was letting my son down. And because the staff aren't trained to deal with that, and there's not enough of them, I really did feel completely alone in that moment, But come the daytime, my husband would come in and he would take over the care of Cole so I could sleep. But at night time, when I'd had my meds, obviously I was very emotional. You will find that you'll have your baby, and the emotional roller coaster you're on whilst you're pregnant continues after birth. You are just a mess. The smallest thing can really upset you. So I was all over the place. But Cole passed all of his tests. They do the hearing test, and they weigh him again, and this, that and the other. He passed everything. He was absolutely fine. He was just quiet. When he was first born, he looked the spitting image of my husband, just completely Dave. Nothing about him said me. And then within a week or two, he was just me. And now he's me most of the time, except when he's having a temper tantrum, and then he's his dad. So if you are sat at home struggling mentally, with your emotions and your fears about medications and this, that and the other, there are medications you can take that don't harm your baby. There are medications that are not tested to see whether they harm a baby. But the bottom line is that you have to be healthy as well. So what's best for you ends up being best for your baby. It really is true when they say happy mum, happy baby. Okay? And that continues after you've had your child. You really do have to look after yourself. But that's my birth story. Thank you for joining me. Please share with as many people as you can, and please subscribe so you don't miss any more. Thank you.